Hello, BookTube. Well, David Wiley is at it again. It's a new year. The same old David Wiley. He, months ago, created a thing on his channel called Bookshelf Essentials, where he looks at the books in his library. We all have lots and lots of books in our library, and some of them are more central to our library than others. Some of them we would not want to do without. I myself have tried very hard to whittle down my library to almost that. I haven't succeeded. We never actually do succeed, but I've come closer than I have than at any point in my life when I wasn't traveling. What you're supposed to do for Bookshelf Essentials, I wish more people would do this, it's a lot of fun, is pull down the book and tell us about it. You do not need to be a graduate expert, a graduate level expert on what you talk about. You just need to tell us what it is and why it's essential. And I have a bookshelf essential for today. For today, my bookshelf essential is the historian Polybius. Here I have the Oxford World Classics translation by Robin Waterfield, a well-known translator. Lots and lots of translations that I've read over the years. And the Oxford World Classics have a terrific introduction, really, really good notes. This translation and these notes are considerably later than the Penguin Classic of Polybius, which I am not holding up right now because I could not find it. I cannot dig it out of my Penguin Classic bookcase. I know that I have it, but it's not being forthcoming. And I have this as well. I do not have the Teubner edition of Polybius without translators. I don't have Polybius where I can just, where I can read him without somebody else in the conversation. But that's okay, because I'm a big fan of English translations on their own. I'm a big fan of them as a kind of writing. In most cases, as we'll see. This is a book, this is the tiny fraction that remains of a long history of Rome written by this historian Polybius, who was born in 200 BC, which stands for before Christ, because the coming of Christianity into the Western world was such an incredible linchpin event that we now date before and after that event as a handy shorthand for time periods. It does not mean that you are an evangelistic Christian. So changing that to a stupid mamby-pamby neologism like before Common Era or whatnot is ridiculous. The turning point is still Jesus. Doesn't mean I'm a Jesus freak. I'm not going to knock on your door because I say that. It's ridiculous. So on this channel, anyway, it will be BC, and that will stand for before Christ, not before Common Era or any other such nonsense. And Polybius was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was born to the upper echelons of his society in a political conglomeration known as the Achaean League. His father was a big poobah in that regard, and at this time, and in this situation, nepotism counted for almost everything. It was just assumed that young Polybius, who was bright and well-spoken and extremely good with letters, would just succeed to his father's position. His father started taking him along, court cases, embassies, that sort of thing, traveling all around. And something happened to stop that, the rosy progress of Polybius's career, and that same something also stopped the rosy progress of the Achaean League, and that was the same thing, and that thing was Rome. It was Rome, which had fought a long knockdown, drag-out fight with Carthage and won, despite setbacks, had won. A major, the closest thing that the world had seen until then to a world war. And the viewers around the Mediterranean and the Adriatic and whatnot, and also you, might look at that and think, well, that sure had to take the steam out of Rome. I bet they were quiet and rebuilding for a while. No, no. The key to Rome's success certainly was not in the tactical brilliance of its generals. Some of the generals that it fielded had the tactical genius of a pet guinea pig. It was instead Rome's almost miraculous ability to generate men. Huge numbers of men, huge numbers of athletic, military service-ready men. Manpower depletions at this time were the key, and Rome didn't have them. For whatever reason, Rome didn't have them. They sprang up in innumerable numbers. And as a result, Rome dealt with Carthage and then turned around and dealt with King Philip V of Macedon, dealt with the Seleucid monarch, Antiochus IV, they mowed people down. They mowed down empires one after another and either collected them or made them vassals. They did the same thing with the Achaean League. And the Achaean League sent hostages to Rome. And Polybius was one of them. That was not the future they envisioned for himself at all. But he was well-spoken and charismatic and friendly, and he eventually came into the orbit of a major Roman family, the Aemilii. Not all that big a fan of the Aemilii, but they played their people played pivotal roles in Rome's history at this time and for a century before and for a century after. And suddenly Polybius was with them. Suddenly he was at their dinner tables, well known to them, not being treated. We in the 21st century have an idea of hostages, and we think of miserable blindfolded figures in basements. But that wasn't always the way. If you were a high-profile social hostage, if you were meant to guarantee the good behavior of your entire city back home, you could often be treated well. And Polybius was treated better than well. He got a major case of Stockholm Syndrome and just ran with it. So he became close friends with his captors. And traveled, saw the Roman world. He knew that the Punic War, the Second Punic War that had been fought against Hannibal, was a major historical event. He knew that perfectly well. Everybody did at the time. He knew it to the point where he collected biographies of the major figures. He collected memoirs of the major figures, and he even did the classic touristy thing of trying to retrace Hannibal's route over the Alps. No small thing, even in summer. And that collecting and that fanboying and all the trips he did to famous sites and whatnot was reflected also in the fact that he was a writer and started to churn out histories of major figures that he knew back in his Achaean League days, and also, naturally, he turned to the subject of Rome and wrote a gigantic history of Rome from which we have a fraction, as usual. We have very little of his history of Rome. But what we have is enough for us, and we have summaries of a lot of it too, and what we have from it is enough for us to know how remarkable it is, how remarkable it was as a book. And Polybius says it himself. Thankfully, one of the parts of his history of Rome that we have is a long digression on the writing of history, absolutely invaluable. For a historian who, say what you want about his slippery personal politics, you get the strong impression when you're reading this book that Polybius would never tell a lie. And for a person like that to write what amounts to a mini treatise on what you should do when you're writing history is a valuable insight into what historians thought at the time, and maybe a valuable insight into how unusual Polybius himself was, because he valued the truth. He valued sources. And he didn't want to be taken in by a source. He analyzed and weighed his sources. It's a very, very egotistical thing, a very hindsighty thing to say, but it feels very modern. The way he thinks about history. We might quibble with how good a job he does, but how many people had ever done that job before him? Not many that we have. Not many that we know about, whose work survive. What I wouldn't give, what anybody who studies this stuff, what you wouldn't give for just an hour with an iPad in Polybius's study in Rome, on the Janiculum. What I wouldn't give to set that up. Send somebody to the front door, get him a really expensive theater package in another town, send him off in a litter with a couple of household slaves and his woman, his daughter or whatever, and just tell him, I'll look after the house while you're gone. You're not going to take anything, but you're going to use the iPad to scan everything in that library. Oh my God. How wonderful that would be. Can't do it, but it's wonderful to daydream about. And that's what you get in this book. There isn't a whole lot of graceful prose. I'm not faulting Robert Waterfield here. I'll get to him in just a minute. It's endemic to Polybius. He's not all that great a writer. It's just the way of it. It's what we used to talk about on the Daily Penguin. It's the pitiless ratio of time. You don't know who's going to be saved. Certainly it's not going to be first come, first serve, and it's also not going to be quality on down. You don't know whose works are going to get saved, even in a fraction. Polybius is a little bit raw, sometimes a little bit headstrong. He has other faults as well that we'll get to. Those faults were amended by historians that loved him, later historians that loved him, including my beloved Livy, who saw right away how incredibly valuable Polybius' book was on Rome. How incredibly valuable that was. Livy wasn't the only one. I mean, later historians and later writers, much later writers, also looked back at this work and saw, okay, this doesn't read like a lot of other ancient historians. This reads like someone I can trust. I might not completely enjoy the reading experience, but I think I can trust that this author wouldn't have had, if he had 10 documents open in front of him on his work table or had slaves reading them to him, he would have known what was worthwhile and what wasn't. He wouldn't have had the gem of all gems that's now lost to us open in front of him on the table and have no idea what he was looking at. That wouldn't have happened. I hate to say it, since he's my boy, my darling, but you do sometimes get that hint about Livy. You do sometimes feel that Livy might have let ideology or an upset stomach blur him to what was valuable on his work table, but not Polybius. He was, I believe the common parlance would be a grind. And as a result, this is a unique reading experience in the surviving ancient histories, especially histories of Rome. Polybius had a clear eye to how important this subject was, and also a clear eye to the fact that it was not an unambiguously good kind of importance. That's valuable. That's really, really valuable. So here in this book, Robin Waterfield takes it upon himself to do the translating honors. Polybius has been translated 4 or 5 times for a popular audience in the 20th century, which I think when this book came out, pretty sure this is a 20th century translation, or close enough so that it doesn't count. Yeah, 2010. So, but if you turn to his translator's note, you get something that is guaranteed to get Steve's goat. And if it bothers me, I'm going to drone about it to you. If I have to suffer, so do you. Let's read a little bit about what Robin Waterfield says here. See if you can see if you can pick the point that bothered me. To me, it is as it is obvious that one should not try to reproduce the original in this respect, it is equally obvious that one should not do so in certain other respects either. I have taken other steps, in addition to breaking up his longer sentences, towards shedding some of his periphrastic long-windedness. On the other hand, I have retained a lot of his pomposity, and have done my best to translate his occasional formulae in recognizably similar ways on each occurrence. But overall, I have made him marginally less stiff than he is, sacrificing, and then in parentheses, translation always entails sacrifice. Says you, Seymour. Sacrificing some literalness to readability, while at the same time believing that previous translators have often been uncharitable. He may be pompous, but he is usually as clear as he is intended to be, and he sometimes achieves a certain elegance. It seems unfair to criticize him for plainness when many historians of his day were writing a highly artificial Greek, heavily influenced by florid rhetorical techniques. Did you spot it? Did you spot it? Who the hell are you? Robin Waterfield? To blunt or change or lessen an author's voice. Would you want that done with your own work? I'm sure that Robin Waterfield, since he's been translating books for 50 years, I'm sure that he's written a sententious memoir. Would you want someone, say that someone took it in their head to do a French translation for the French market? I don't think that's likely. But what if someone did? And what if in that translator's note, they said, well, yes, the author can be a bit pompous and long-winded. I've done my best to fix that. There would be no end of irate letters from Robin Waterfield about that. Polybius is not alive. He can't give those letters. So allow me, who the hell are you, to step in here and give me your version of the voice of this author? That's not your job as a translator, and that drives me crazy. Why is that so widespread in translations of classics? Why? If that question is not rhetorical, I would like to answer it. I think I can answer my own question, which is that a lot of these things are aiming for a school market. They're aiming to sell in bulk to high schools or colleges. And that, I'm sure that somewhere along the line, in some editorial room somewhere, the discussion is had that, well, the author that I'm translating at the moment isn't all that amenable to a general reading. If I translate him exactly literally, we might lose those students. Somebody might go to a better translation, a friendlier translation. So maybe you want to... That might be the reason. I can't think of any other reason at all. If Robin Waterfield were tasked with translating Flaubert, would he dare to tamper with the author's tone and then admit it and say, oh, translation involves sacrifice. No, he wouldn't. I don't want to read Robin Waterfield's version of this author's voice. He has a voice in the original, and it can be pompous, it can be bombastic. I'm not just reading this to find out what happened. If I want to know exactly what happened in the Second Punic War, I will go to archaeology. I will not go to the surviving contemporary or near contemporary histories. Thank you very much. I'll go to archaeology, which is unambiguous. When I'm coming to an author like this, or like Livy, or like Tacitus, I want not only what facts they convey, but also how they convey them. So that's my little bugaboo with this. The bookshelf essential that I'm talking about here is the surviving chunks of Polybius that we have, not necessarily just this translation. I can take or leave this specific translation. Hoping that's clear. For my next bookshelf essential, I'll pick something in English so we don't have to go through this again anytime soon. But there you go. That is a bookshelf essential. A historian who is not in the front ranks of ancient historians. He's not Herodotus or Thucydides or Livy, certainly, who owed a lot to him, or even Xenophon. He's the second rank of ancient historians, but still very much worthwhile to read and invaluable. Invaluable. Even the little bit that we have is invaluable in terms of fleshing out what literature can do that archaeology can't do. So that's a bookshelf essential. It's mainly Polybius and not the Robin Waterfield translation, although his translation is fairly good. It just, that bugs me. That really bugs me. I don't want my translators to do that. And I think this is the subtle, silent condescension that we show towards the dead. I don't believe that Robin Waterfield would dream of doing this and admitting it about a living author. But I guess with Polybius, it's okay. I want to read the voice that's there in the original. And so far, in terms of translations, I have never done that. So, but anyway, that's a bookshelf essential for today. It's Polybius. We'll see if we can come up with something less contentious next time. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.